in view of the development happened since last few years. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. It was considered as too big to fail. It happened. Greece bailout happened in 2010. US fiscal cliff happened in 2012. Fed announces changes in chances of QE tapering. Then structural risks in emerging market, which everyone we have witnessed, including in India. Then US government shutdown, which this risk which is there, and it's still hanging on our head, and we do not know when it will get resolved. Because of these volatile conditions, basically in today's everything is interlinked. We cannot say that we are decoupled economy. We cannot say that we are insulated. If US is going to catch cold, definitely it's not true. We may get cold or not, but certainly we are going to sneeze. So to that extent, we can't say there is a decoupling. Everything gets impacted, and because of this movement, we have seen even during the current year, you will see that how the currencies have moved. INR, Brazilian lira, particularly the emerging market currencies have moved significantly. They have been very volatile, and we have witnessed to those volatile movement. And this is another interesting graph. Let me confess, I am not showing anything new. You might have come across all this information. Your banker must be presenting this. But before we get into risk, actual subject of risk, it is important to understand the background and the context. So to that extent, these slides assumes importance. If you see the volatility in the currency since January, the kind of depreciation we have seen in this emerging market currencies, the dollar index has not moved significantly, but Indian rupee, Malaysian dollar, Australian dollar, Thai baht, Brazilian real, Russian ruble, Indonesian rupiah, South African rand, Turkish lira, they have moved significantly. And now, and why this, why so much of adverse movement? Just because Fed says that the QE taper, not Fed says, people have thought probably that the QE tapering will be there. But once the Fed announced that QE tapering will not be there, then the things changed. And you can see across emerging market currencies, the currencies have appreciated. Roller coaster ride for INR. Since last almost 1 year, you can see the kind of movement. And we saw a one-way journey till probably August and September. Then some correction. We still do not know where these are headed. Of course, yesterday's numbers on current account deficit and other things will provide some comfort as well as those things. One of the reasons behind this roller coaster ride, besides the QE tapering uncertainty, is also because of the fundamental problem in the Indian economy. The current account deficit has continuously risen, and you can see that current account deficit as a percentage of GDP has increased from 1 to 2%, from 1 to 2% to 4.8% now. And in Brazil, you see the current account deficit is probably 1.5%, but still their currency has depreciated significantly. In order to address this current account deficit, because this is a fundamental and structural problem, our dependence on FII flow is very heavy, and those determines basically the short-term movement in the interest exchange rate and the exchange rate particularly. And we have seen, fortunately, when the GDP growth rate was there, India was growing fantastically. There was a slowdown in US, there was a slowdown in Europe area, and there was a easy liquidity, easy availability of money. The money found its way. It flew, it went to the emerging market economies, which we are growing 8%, 7%, and we are talking of 2-digit. So on one hand, we were a fantastic GDP growth. On the other hand, too much of money was flowing into these emerging markets. As a result, the currencies didn't depreciate, rather they appreciated. In a normal situation, if we have a currency, if we have an economy where the inflation rate is upwards of 5% or 6%, the interest rates have to be higher. If the interest rates have to be higher as compared to other economy where there is a less inflation, then the currency logically should depreciate. Otherwise, why there should be a premium for the currency? But that didn't hold good during this period because the sheer inflow of FI money into the emerging markets. And so this inflation has put pressure on the INR weakening as well. You can see how the inflation has behaved, and of course it has moderated a little bit, but we are still not out of the problem. The GDP growth, we were talking of 10%. Now it has come down significantly. We do not know whether it will be 4.5%, 5%, sub 5%. The other problem with this is, on one hand, our GDP growth rate is falling. On the other hand, the US growth rate is increasing. So to that extent, the gap has increased, and to that extent, money will flow where the growth lies. Money came to us when the GDP was growing at 8%, 9%. Now, if the growth is not there, if the inflation is high, money will probably may not come at the same pace it used to come. Coupled with high inflation, high current account deficit, high fiscal deficit, we have concern, and IMF have also projected a lower growth rate for India. Now, what are the factors which are affecting INR as of now? Improvement, positive factors, these are the factors as of now, and these are not constant factors. None of the factors or variables are constant. These keeps changing depending on the time. Improvement in export data, which we have witnessed yesterday only. Reduction in monthly trade deficit, largely on account of increase in exports, coupled with import containment on gold and other things. As a result, current account deficit is expected to reduce from 4.8% to 3.5%. And because of the recent measures taken by the new RBI governor, we are likely to bridge the gap of $15 billion, and there is no immediate concern on the hot money or the liquidity flowing away, because of still it is not clear when the tapering will vanish. The negatives are weak economic growth. The economic growth continues to be weak and will remain challenging going forward, and a lot of it will depend how the election verdict is there. In case the election verdict is not clear, then probably it may have a further impact on the growth. And it is not only growth. Even if the economy picks up, the project will take time to get implemented, and we will start seeing the impact of project only after 2 to 3 years. So it is not that something, even if the economy improves, we will start seeing the result immediately. So hopefully the problem is likely to continue for some more time, and high inflation, negative net FI outflows. In case QE tapering is basically there, then probably we may see FI outflow. Fiscal deficit continues to remain high. Now coming to the main subject, forex risk and hedging. As I said earlier, risk is there in every area. I am speaking here, there is also a risk. There is a reputation risk for me, there is a reputation risk for because organization. So there is a whole host of risk. So risk is everywhere, we cannot eliminate it. So what is important in the risk process is we assess the risk, we measure the risk, we try to control and manage the risk, then we try to transfer the risk to the extent it can be transferred. Take the case of insurance. There is a risk of fire, there is a risk of flood. To the extent there is a risk of earthquake, we assess those risks to the extent we can retain. If it is not a earthquake prone zone, probably we do not take those covers, and if there are other risks, we still go and take the insurance policy. And then we have to continuously review the risk and have a proper reporting mechanism in place, because none of the risk, none of the factors are constant. These are variables, keep on changing from time to time depending on the factors prevailing domestically and globally. In the context of foreign exchange, basically we are exposed to three risks. One is a transaction risk. Basically exchange rate moving from say INR moving from 62 to 65 in case of import or export, whatever it may be. Translation risk, impacting the profit loss account of the corporates or who are exposed to that risk, and the economic risk. Now once a risk is there, once we have identified there, as far as the forex risk is concerned, these are the 5 alternative possible. No hedge. You don't hedge at all. What are the possible options? You don't hedge at all. Hedge everything. Hedge partially. Make a selective hedge. And you hedge with the intent of making money out of that. So, and lot of it will depend on the corporate philosophy. See, and based on some survey, it has been found that the most prevalent practice is selective hedge. Second is hedge everything. Third is make a partial hedge. Fourth is make no hedge. And lastly, it is profit from hedge. See, when a corporate is in business, we are all talking in terms of risk in relation to the business. When we are in business, we are exposed to number of risks. We are exposed to product risk, substitution risk, obsolescence risk, pricing risk, demand risk, supply risk, risk of property getting damaged, foreign exchange risk. So the prime objective of a corporate should be to eliminate or minimize the risk to the extent those can be eliminated, because there are number of risks. We take insurance because we do not want to take risk of loss of property. Why not take a risk, eliminate the risk of hedge, foreign exchange movement by taking a hedge? Because the objective of a company or anyone carrying business is to make money, to carry on the business and make money from the sale of goods and services. It is not established with the objective of making or losing money from currency movement. So I personally feel there is no point in not hedging that risk, more particularly when we are aware that risk can be hedged upfront for a cost which is known upfront. Again, hedging can be both internal and external. What I mean by internal is basically if you have an export, if you have an import, there is a natural hedge, and if you want to hedge the risk externally, in case of a net exposure, you can go and take the hedges. You see, the objective of hedging is to reduce risk and not making profit, but at the same time maximizing profit, because if we don't take hedge and if we are hit, then the profitability will be impacted sharply. You might have seen number of charts from number of banks. At least I have not seen in my entire life that any bank presenting me this chart. Let me explain you what I have done. Dollar rupee today is 62 and premium for 6 months is say 2 rupees. So my forward rate, suppose we are on 1st of October, so my forward rate for 6 months down the line becomes 64. Now I am measuring that 64 with what is the rate on 1st of April 2014, because I am taking the cover on 1st of October 2013 for a risk arising on 1st of April, and then what is the rate on 1st of April 2014, and this data is for last 12 years. This data is for last 12 years and it is an eye-opening data. You see, and these data are not my data. These data have been downloaded from the Reuters with a margin of error of less than 5%. Now, if we have hedged versus if we have kept everything open over last 12 years, then our average if we would have hedged, then our average forward rate would have been 47.25. And if we have not hedged anything and simply went to the market, we would have got an average spot rate of 46.94 rupees. So 31 paise over 12 years. Why we want to expose to risk? There is no need. Why we want to? Because if we go for selective hedging, if we go for opportunistic hedging, then there is a probability of making that error. So, so you can download the data from Reuters, and this is a eye-opening facts. I don't think any of the banker to any of the corporate would have presented this. Now the counter argument could be, look, you are taking 12 years data, it's too long. In today's time, 3 months is long. Where is the question of 12 years? Okay, let's go to 5-year period when we had Lehman crisis, when we had Greece bailout, when we had US problem, and when we have this present problem of emerging market. This is 5-year data. Of course, here average spot is slightly inferior as compared to the average forward rate. And this takes into account the rupee even at the rate of 68. This takes into account the entire period. You have the October 2008 and it is extended up to September 13. The graph is there, but the average has been calculated on last 5 years. So this is an important piece. So if we are getting a hedge for such a nominal amount over, then we have 12-year data, we have 5-year data, why we expose ourselves to risk? How much time I have? Huh? 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So keeping everything in mind, we need to have now it's a function of corporate philosophy, but my suggestion would be, we are in the business of manufacturing and selling goods and services. We are not in the business of making money out of currency movement or interest rate movement. If someone wants to make money out of currency movement or interest rate movement, let him go and play in the stock market. Fortunately, now we have foreign currencies derivatives available on the stock exchange. Let's not mix up those things with the business, because the shareholder, the stakeholder have not given money to the company to play in the currencies. Again, it's a function of corporate philosophy, right or wrong. You see, now I'll give 4 examples. In today's time, everything can be freely imported and exported, barring few commodities. When we enter into a contract for import or export, we do not do out of nationalistic reason. Let's not be political. We do out of commercial reasons. So if a commodity can be freely exported and at the same time can be sold in the domestic market, the usual way to accept an order is to see my manufacturing cost, see what rate the overseas buyer is giving, and what is my margin, what is my exchange rate, what is my forward premia, and then we enter into a contract. Now, having entered into a contract by analyzing these factors, and then for some reason if we keep the exposure open, and if the exchange rate move either way, then we are destroying the very foundation of the initial decision. The initial decision was based on a particular manufacturing cost, particular exchange rate, particular margin, and those things. Similarly, that is in case the context of trade transaction. In the context of foreign exchange borrowing, Why we go for foreign currency borrowing or INR borrowing? Because on a fully hedged basis, we compare on and we see whether on a fully hedged basis, whether the foreign currency borrowing is working out cheaper as compared to INR borrowing or not. Now, having factored in that thing, then if we keep the exposure open in case of foreign currency borrowing, then we are again destroying the very foundation of the initial decision. So basically those cases are nothing but speculation, and if somebody wants to speculate, nothing wrong with that, but let's not mix up with business. Speculation has to be carried out separately. In order to have a proper risk management, risk policy, we need to have a proper forex risk management, exchange risk management and policy in place. You will appreciate that risk is a large subject, foreign currency. So 30 minutes or 40 minutes you cannot cover up everything. So that's why it has been curtailed, and during the question and answer session, I'll be happy to answer any queries you will have. Basically, we need to have a foreign exchange management policy. It should, what the objective should be, to protect the cash flow and shareholders' value, because no one wants volatile cash flow. Neither the owner nor the investors want a volatile cash flow. We want to have predictability of cash flow. We borrow. When we borrow, what do? We make a model that this is my profitability, this is my projected profitability, and if the profits are volatile, it will we may get into problem. Our bankers may not be happy. So that should be the objective, to protect, to have a stable cash flow. The policy should cover all kind of foreign transaction, import, export, loans, investment, capex. I am mentioning capex separately because that's a long-term thing, should not be mixed up with the revenue item. When we evaluate any capex proposal, we compute internal rate of return or other things. So if we don't insulate the risk on those imported items, then again the project cost may go haywire. Then we need to identify and classify exposure by nature, whether it is a revenue nature or it is a capital item, period, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. The longer you go, the longer you get into the period of uncertainty. Because in a longer period, you probably may get an opportunity to hedge or not, but in a shorter period, then you are hit. One of big ticket item, we cannot be mixing. If you have a monthly export and import of $500,000, and then you all of there is a large one ticket item of $2 million, you can't be clubbing everything together. You need to deal with that $5 million item separately. Then you need to have a proper risk management structure in place, comprising of Forex Risk Management Committee, Risk Management, Compliance Officer. These are just my suggestion. Then you need to specify. You can have your own risk management structure. This is only a suggested model. You need to specify what are the permitted hedging instrument and tool, like forward, option, swaps, and even in option and swaps, one thing is very clear. If we want to hedge the risk, we need to know in day one what is my worst case scenario. If we do not know what is my worst case scenario, then we are simply again adding one more risk. It is not hedging of risk, it is adding one more risk. Then you need to manage exposure at a gross level or a net level. I will deal with some of the items separately. Then you need to define what is the coverage ratio parameters, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. The longer the time horizon, because the predictability of those Forex exposure, the variation predictability is high, so you need to have a higher haircut in those long-term exposure. You need to, of course, have ISDA guidelines, internal control, back office, front office, monthly MIS. It is not necessarily the same person is taking taking the hedge from the bank, the same person is making the account, doing the accounting, same person is reporting. Then we may have a bearing bank like of kind of situation, Nicolation, which can bring down the entire bank. Then of course exceptions need to be reviewed and reported to the risk management committee. I will not go through these are the procedural aspect which most of you are aware under the extant guidelines. You cannot have, these are for confirmed exposure, you cannot have hedges exceeding the tenor and amount exceeding the underlying guideline. You need to submit to the order how much you can cancel. In case you fail to submit the underlying, then the profit, the bank will not allow you other thing, not allow you to book further, and they will keep the profit where the loss will belong to you. This is in case of anticipated exposure. I am not going through it. You can go through this. Nothing new. These are the statutory guidelines, law of the land. We are no exception. Everyone is bound by this. Now, these, as I have listed some of the issues which we can have, on which we can devote some time, whether on gross basis or net basis. You see, India is not a capital account convertibility. So if you have to realize your export, you have to compulsorily go and sell dollars and receive INR. Similarly, if you have to make payment for imports, you have to compulsorily buy dollars and give INR to the bank. So whether you say whether you hedge or gross or basis, net basis, eventual settlement takes place on gross basis only. So you cannot save on bid offer spread just because you are taking a hedge on net basis. Now the best possible scenario could be you take a hedge on the basis of net basis, but before you enter the month for which this transaction relates, you segregate on the gross basis. The reason being the size and the time of transaction can be different. Your import can be of import bill value, individual import bill value can be of $50,000, whereas the export value can be of $50,000, import value can be of $1 million, which is likely to be the case in most of the cases. And import is happening on 29th, export is happening throughout the month. There is no, you can't have hedges on net basis. So before that month, you segregate those gross thing, ask your bank to use the same spot reference, so you do not lose on bid and offer. Let him provide you hedge on import and export separately by maintaining the same spot rate. He will be indifferent to the spot rate, and then you are insulated. Otherwise, if you keep it open and 6 days, these days every day, there are days when the rupee fluctuates between 1 rupee. So if you don't segregate, then you may get hit hard when the import payment comes. In case of a long-term exposure can be anything. If the question is whether you want to take the hedges for long-term or short-term. Now that could be a function of whether the present forward premium are high or low. But when you are taking a hedges for a underlying which is for a long-term, but you are taking hedges for a short-term, you must consider one thing in your mind. Keep one thing in your mind. Then you are carrying a cash flow risk. You are not carrying a actual profit and loss risk, but you are carrying a cash flow risk, because when you have to roll it over, and for some reason if the currency is against you, then you have to pay that much of cash. Of course, then there is no actual loss, but you have a cash flow issue. Now, if you have multiple currencies, probably the ideal situation will be to, instead of monitoring JPY, CAD, Euro, everything separately, it is ideal that if you are domiciled in India, you convert everything probably to USD. PCFC or packing credit in rupee, besides the commercial, the decision will be driven by whether on a fully hedged basis, which one is cheaper. But if PCFC is cheaper, it is better to take PCFC. The reason being, if you do not take PCFC, for each export you take individual hedges, and if your export bill size is $50,000, then probably the person who is taking the hedge, probably he may not negotiate with the bank. And even if he negotiate with the bank, these are not standard lot size. So the bank will give out of its own books whose rate is likely to be going to be inferior than the rate which you will otherwise get on a normal export bill. But if you are taking a PCFC, probably you will negotiate the rate at the time of taking PCFC. Then subsequently, as and when the export bills get crystallized, you don't have to worry about what is the exchange rate, because you have already freezed your dollar rupee exchange liability. And next thing is PCFC, whether you are taking as a loan or as a hedge. You can technically you can take a PCFC as a loan also and provide export proof against that. Then hedging instrument, forward option, future swaps, ECB hedge, accounting challenges. Of course, one of the accounting challenge, best thing would be if you can go for selective AS30, because if you go for full-fledged AS30, probably there could be an accounting challenge, but you can go for selective AS30 in the sense you adopt AS30, but you designate only the large ticket item. Centralization or decentralization, this has its own challenges. The best way will be if you have a multiple location entities, then the best way is you go on ABC analysis, concentrate on A value items constituting 70% the value terms, small in number, have centralization for them, have decentralization for smaller value items, because then you are getting into operation. I think with this, I have overshoot my time. My apologies. So,
thanks, Agni. You mitigated my risk. Good afternoon to everybody. I think the voice is very feeble. The Josh is not there. Good afternoon once again. Look, today, the topic which I want to share from my bottom of heart and based on experiences which I have gained and I have seen my other counterparts creating a value, I thought this was the befitting topic for me to share from this platform. The topic is what all make happen enterprise value in a breakthrough approach, increasing day by day, quarter by quarter. One thing let me tell you, a small perspective is like our belief is like human is mortal and organizations are immortal, but things are reversing. Human life is increasing and organization life is decreasing. Life expectancy, if you see the data, recently the Japan and Europe, the life expectancy of corporate has fallen to 12.5 years. Germany is 42 years to 18 years. France is gone down from 13 to 9 years. And UK, for certain period, it came down to 4 years. Can you believe what all that has happened? Why this has happened? So now one has to worry about, more than creating a value, this is obsolete, the life expectancy of the corporate itself is a bigger issue. So my dear friends, the issue is revolving, whether as a CFO or business leader or chartered accountants or in your own way and self-styled leader, there are certain tips and which I'll be sharing based on what other leaders have done. First of all, if we get into our mindset of managing in a conventional pattern, no ethical practices, no growth strategy, and IT illusion, not income tax, because chartered accountants will mistake first income tax. This is information technology illusion. So dying corporates on steroids. Like somebody was fired 3 months back by email, and you want to send an email to baby. Something like that boys is there on the first room and parents are calling them to join for the dinner through email. And no, you are not downloaded, you are born, the mother telling the small child, why this is flipping so fast? Okay. I think my focus will be on this larger topics. The bad news is I have more than 60 slides, but good news is most of the slides I will take them as read and to be read by you later. We are talking of 3 eras. I have been fortunate having witnessed this all 3 eras, right from 74 when I started my working as a corporate executive journey. When pre-90s, because India was only market, we could sell whatever you produce, irrespective of the quality factors. You are safe and secure thanks to the government policies, import restrictions and those kind of things. So there was nothing like any killing instinct required to upgrade your products, change your business model, improve your productivity, improve your quality. Nothing of those challenges were there. Then you come to between 90 to 2005, you are exposed to somewhat that heat of competition from the global level, affecting your product, services and capital. But now, 2005 onward until today, is something like you have to create your own viability. And I'm not talking of only from a restricted meaning of manufacturing entities, even as a profession. It has to compete effectively in global environment. And you have to have your mind become like global company. So like you think regionally, act globally. So it is new concept has come, global entity. So what are those paradigms? Quickly if you look at, and I can see that these are something which is impacting. Like IT-enabled processes and technology advancement is a one business paradigm or business dynamic. Unless you have a robust IT-enabled process, you can't think of reducing the cycle times. You can't quicken your business responses, and that only can create edge over your competition. So is the case with M&A. It's become, when I said in my preamble words that life expectancy, is because of now dinosaurs are eating away small organizations. And that is what small value organizations are not able to see the survival. And that's the function of M&A, which is happening left and right. Customer expectations. You have to distinguish between what you produce or what you offer to your customer and what customers need out of you. There is always, if the link is seen by respecting, appreciating the need and expectation of customer, then your business model will get corrected. But probably sometimes we remain under that illusion that what we produce is the best. If customers don't accept, business goes funky. I will show you some of the examples. Governance and best practices. McKinsey's theory, you know that best governing practices command again a premium to stock market more than 25% if it is like in the North Americas or Asias. These are the statistics. Even in case of Europe and Africa, it's something like more than 35 times. So best governing practices now command a higher premium in financial terms. More than that, also respect and credibility. Business risk and security concerns, one of the major risks Mr. Rastogi has already covered. As you step out of your businesses beyond your national boundaries, your business risk and concerns are increasing. And with IT being added more, you are exposed to far more higher degree of risk. So risks are plenty. You have to live with that. Somewhere you have to trade it off. Somewhere you have to eliminate. Somewhere you have to treat that risk. Somewhere to transfer the risk. But you must be aware what risk you are exposed to, what is the cost estimate of the risk, what is the cost of mitigating the risk, and what are the alternative plans you have to address those risks. Global competition, regulatory compliances, of late everywhere you are exposed to some sort of stringent regulatory the compliances. When you are outside the country, again I think that's a major challenge. Now question another is for survival is your changing business models. I mean, now the competition is not product inter-se. Competition is not about what services you offer. The competition, according to even that great management guru C.K. Prahalad, is competition is what business model you adopt to create edge over your competition. It is with that regard. And you have to continuously look at in terms of your what kind of business model you are evolving. And friends, I want you to look at very carefully on these 4 negative pills. And I can tell you, 80% of the corporates world over, including Fortune 500 companies, 1/3 of Fortune 500 companies vanished between 1973 to 81 in just 10 years' time because they were victim of one or more of these negative pills. And whether you call self-destructive habits of the corporate or whether you call something which you necessarily must know and avoid this. What are they? Self-denial. Moment you start denying, and please reflect, this can be applied equally for manufacturing, service industry, practicing chartered accountant or any leader by himself. If you deny that there is emerging technology. You have many examples, IBM, digital, and many also in our country. You can see that. You just see the corporate map of 1970s, which corporates were there, and how many are there surviving because they denied the emerging technology and challenge of those technologies which was coming. Xerox. Changing customer tests. Now, the customer tests have become much more vibrant because of that youngsters, the demographic tests, and kind of some different which are fueling to that test level. So one has to know what is the test, and accordingly needs have to be extrapolated to what you produce. Conflicting interest and fraud. You deny that there is no conflicting interest. But let me tell you, in Indian context, more than 70% corporates have some sort of knowingly, unknowingly personal conflicts. And that's what causing as a big value destroyal factor. Not admitting that there is a fraud. In many companies, examples, Satyam is of course more of a public domain, but that's tip on the iceberg. KPMG's analysis says 6% of gross revenue is today faltered through white collar crime. That's the data. Arrogance is another negative pill. Exceptional achievement of the past. When you start, showing up like these youngsters, they don't have any smart idea. You don't need to even give any listening to those brighter ideas. And you start showing that you are the mightiest competition. No organization survives once the arrogance creeps in the heads of the leaders. And that organization falls. And many examples are there. Complacency is that famous example. Probably you might not have seen the Doordarshan channel. When did you travel? I don't remember. When did you visit that, view that? Post office, another better example. Air India is another example. Some of the old timer banks, without naming, because bankers probably are there in this crowd. So why? Because they were having a protection of the government. They were enjoying that government monopoly kind of situation. And today when they are open to compete with private sector, banks or aviation industry, others, they are no longer there. Greed obsession, Lehman Brothers. All professionals, problem with most of the professionals, including us, is that when you see everybody's earning, then we want to become a partner of earning that slice. And try to justify in terms of leverages, those fine management jargons, kuch nahi hota. But best level is 100 rupees of your house, and then you over leverage to the extent of 600. That was happening in US. And what happened? When prices dropped from 600 to 300, the best level capital has vanished. So this is greed obsession. I don't have to run through. Most of the organizations, they have not lost only financial capital, they have lost human capital. They have created a lot of problems and tremors in overall social and human fabric. That's the point. That's why this data is there. So a poor CFO alone cannot do anything. Yes, the role has underwent significant change. I was having my absolutely, after spending sleepless night on telling the trial balance in way back 1978 of Wipro, and I used to throw a small party in Woodlands Hotel by giving idlis and sambars to my colleagues, because that was the joy. Telling the trial balance was the absolutely great achievement. Today some CFO says that I tell it trial balance or balance it, he has to be fired immediately. So things have changed. Now he is truly integrated to business decision. He is facilitating the basically overall business growth and profitability. He is the part and parcel of creating right from vision and achieving the corporate objectives, integrating his financial goals and objectives with the corporate goals and objectives. He has to have that neck, then only he can function as a successful CFO. He must understand in the business how and where value is made or created. He must know, and that he can know only when he has a broad, deep understanding of the business dynamics. Then he will know इस business में यहाँ पे पैसा बनता है और इस business में यहाँ पैसा loss होता है. Once he has a clear understanding, then he can relate his function and he can work as a very effective, efficient CFO. That is called value chain competency. Number 2, he must have a proper understanding of concept of risk competency. And then nowadays he is to face with too many type of stakeholders. His immediate boss, board, investors, analysts, government authorities, and sometimes very distinguished visiting authorities which come to the campus of the office premises, IT rates, this, that, DRI, वगैरह सब. Now he has to face these multiple, stakeholders. So he has to have that competency, how to handle these multiple stakeholders and their expectations. And sometimes they are highly conflicting. Regulatory compliances and performance measurement. He must know what organization is churning the results. Finally, what are the performance measurement tools what are the ideal performance measurement tools which he should use and convey those results to these respective stakeholders. These are various things which he has to be part. I have stated, like from risk management, corporate governance, he must uphold company's values and create atmosphere of trust. He must be like enabler in driving growth, profitability, cost control, customer analysis, kind of things. Point here is the CFO is no longer sitting in ivory tower doing only accounts and financial transactions or budget or cost controls. He has to step out and work along with, I must use the word, as a partnering process with CEO and business leaders. Then only he will be respected, regarded as a right CFO. Otherwise, it is only as a visiting card designation. These are just good words of Lakshmi Mittal in the context of he was delivering, addressing to the finance community, so I wrote this. High performance companies exist even in the so-called unattractive industries. It requires mindset and willingness to benchmark, not against the average or the comparable, but against the best, and draw both inspirational and learning from those benchmarks to drive oneself forward. Look, there are